The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. My name is Courtney Pollock, and I am the Marketing Coordinator for SWK Technologies. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, How Nonprofits Achieve Mission Success with Sage Intacct, presented by Linda Pinion. A little housekeeping before we get started. Everyone has been placed on mute to keep the background noise to a minimum. However, throughout the webinar, you can submit any questions you have. If you'd like to submit a question, look for the questions section in your GoToWebinar, and we will answer all your questions at the end of the presentation. We're also recording this presentation, and it will be distributed tomorrow to all attendees, as well as those who registered but were unable to attend. And finally, we would appreciate your participation in our polling questions throughout the presentation. With that said, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to attend this webinar. We're here to help you get the most out of your software solutions and help you find an easier way to run your business by providing you tools, support, software, and industry knowledge whenever you need it. We've invited Sage Intacct here today because they are the #1 cloud accounting software for nonprofits. So whether you're here researching a new solution or you're just here to learn, we'd like to encourage you to ask any questions you have. And lastly, as a quick reminder, SWK is constantly sharing important updates and software tips and tricks on our social media channels. We encourage you to follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content like this. And with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Linda.
Thank you so much, Courtney. I appreciate you giving us a good overview of some of the logistics. And as Courtney said, this is going to be interactive in that we will stop at the end and open it up for some Q&A. I think Courtney's got maybe a couple of polling questions in our session today. So just thank you, Courtney, for doing such a great job in putting this all together. As Courtney mentioned, I am your hostess today. I have been at Sage Intacct for 12 years now. I've seen the company grow. I've seen the product grow. And one of the things that I'm really excited about sharing with you today is talking about nonprofits. And I want to just put a little plug in here because when I started 12 years ago with Sage Intacct, nonprofits were really not so much on the radar screen. And I say that because certainly we were prospecting and delivering solutions to nonprofits, but if you fast forward over the course of the last, I'm going to say the last 7-8 years, this is a vertical that has really taken off for us. And that's the great news for you, because what that means is we have continued to add additional functionality to the product. We also have added more resources and focus to this vertical. So today you would see that we have dedicated people in product development. We have champions in our implementation and our services area. We have partners like SWK who have focused on this vertical and have expertise and knowledge around nonprofits. So just a lot of focus on this particular vertical. And so I'm happy to share where we are with the vertical today. And if you have not seen Sage Intacct before, I welcome you to the session today. I know that you're going to take away some great nuggets. So by way of agenda, I'll just cover this really quickly just so you know where we're going, our introduction and agenda that we're covering now. I want to talk to you a little bit about nonprofit, how nonprofit has changed. There's been some new things that have happened and some new compliances. And nonprofit has been pretty static. But now we're seeing things that are kind of changing the landscape. And then I'm going to move into the product, and that's where we're going to spend the lion's share of our time today, is looking at the product. And we're going to focus on 3 key areas: visibility, flexibility, and automation. And I'll cover those a little bit more. And then, of course, we've got the poll and the Q&A. So I asked Courtney to include this today because to me, this is really telling of nonprofits. And, you know, we've been through the last 2 years. Courtney and I were talking about it before we jumped on the webinar today. We were talking about where are we in this new normal, if you will. And for many folks, lots of things changed. For all of us, maybe going to a remote office was a brand new thing for us, changing the way we took care of our children, changing the way we bought our groceries. I use Instacart all the time now so that I don't go to the grocery store. Just looking at all the things that have happened to the population over the last 2 years. And I thought that this was a pretty important metric to share with you. Even with all of that going on, even with, you know, some people unfortunately not being employed, not being where they were financially before the pandemic, on Giving Tuesday, it was a record-breaking $2.7 billion. So if you think about that, you know, we are still a very loving, caring, giving nation, and we are still supporting nonprofit organizations with our donations, with our time, with our efforts to make sure that we are really that same population of caring and giving. So just kudos to everyone who is helping other nonprofits. Maybe you have a favorite that you specifically donate to or provide time to, but just a great number. When all this turmoil that we are facing today, I think it's important to remember that there are some good, positive things like this metric that we can share. So one of the things that I mentioned was that nonprofits have changed and the nonprofit world has changed. While, you know, we've seen donations maybe change in where donations are being made, we've certainly seen that nonprofits still need a lot of services. They need help. They need and have demand for services. And so they're a very needed part of our ecosystem. And they provide so many services, so many programs. That has continued to increase. It's also, at the same time, there's some competition for people and for funding. So if you look at some of the organizations, you see that, you know, there's lots of people applying for grants and applying for funding. Maybe there's only so many people that are applying to help and be resources to these nonprofits. So it's important for a nonprofit to be attractive, both from a funding perspective and from a recruitment perspective. And part of that, you know, means that you need to be embracing technology. You need to be embracing new ways of working smarter and having those avenues so that you can be that nonprofit that is in the news. Additionally, as with lots of verticals and lots of different industries, there are things that have changed with compliance requirements. Nonprofits have always had to be compliant. They've always had to be those good stewards of the money and to make sure that they are providing that audit trail of all of the transactions. Where is the money going? How is the money being spent? Where are the expenses coming from? Now we have some new compliances with the FASB 958, with or without restrictions. And so, you know, one of the things that you'll see in the compliance area today is the ability within Sage Intacct to help you with that 990, to help you create the 958 report. So all of this is part of us being proactive in making sure that Our solution is keeping you compliant with the rules. And of course, that gets us to the point to where we have to provide you with a easier, better way to show that transparency. Again, making sure that you can go back and you can see where these transactions were posted, how that money was distributed, and how that money was spent on expenses, and giving you access to your information. As we look at data transparency, what does that really mean? You know, what does it mean to be transparent? And part of that transparency we owe to our donors, because donors want to know when they donate money that their money is being spent or being invested in a particular cause, a particular program. I know in my church family, when we have a specific offering that's for some particular program, I want to see, as a donor, I want to see the results of that. If I am contributing to a specific fund or a specific program, I want to see the results. I want to be able to see it as, you know, as a donor. I don't need to be an executive or be, you know, part of the executive staff at the church to see it. I want to see it as a parishioner. And so as we look at that, we say, well, if I'm able to recognize that my donation is being spent in the area in which I directed it, then I'm more apt to give money again, because I see the result of my giving. So a few things that we notice about those challenges around data transparency are that if you don't have a good solution for your financial management, many times it's hard to get to that data. Getting to that information that's been recorded manually is pretty much a nightmare. Certainly, if you can get to it, it might take you a good while to get to that point. And then what you might find is that some of that information is not accurate. And that's because it is done manually, and because people are more prone to make a mistake when they re-enter information multiple times. I also don't have the ability to analyze that information very well. When it's all in manual type of transactions, or even when it's in Excel spreadsheets, I could have multiple spreadsheets that I'm looking at, and I have to collate those and manipulate that data and pull it together in order for me to get the information that I need. And that all takes time. And many times in nonprofit organizations, not everyone comes with the same skill set. So while several people may have Excel capabilities and knowledge and be very savvy with it, there are others in your organization that may not be accounting people. They may not be Excel people. So how do we work with that? And then just, you know, looking at the speed of how that information is conveyed. By the time you get it, that information could be out of date. And if you're making business decisions on it, you could be making decisions that are not accurate because the data is not accurate. So what we want to look at today is really just being able to share with you, you know, where is Sage Intacct and how do we work in the nonprofit world. And before we get to that, we want to ask you this poll question. How are you tracking operational data today? And operational data is information that, you know, is not necessarily financial information, but data that's coming from maybe even another solution. Maybe you're doing your member management with another application. Maybe you have some other solution like a Salesforce on the front end that you're doing some of your campaigning, and maybe your donor management is being done through Salesforce. So how how are you collecting operational data today? And Courtney's got a screen up here that will allow you to select all that apply. So you may have more than one answer. So a manual entry, maybe you're using Sage Intacct, you use another solution, or you track some other way.
Yes, and thank you to everyone for responding to the poll. We are going to close that out shortly.
This gives us a little touch point because we'll be sharing with you some screens and reports and views today that will show you how we do that in Sage Intacct.
Okay, so we just closed out the poll, and Linda, it looks like we have a mix between manual entry and tracking another way.
Okay, all right, perfect. Well, we'll see if we can't get some folks to move that button up to tracking with Sage Intacct. All right, so as advertised, let's talk a little bit about what Sage Intacct looks like from a cloud financial management solution and why we're known as best in class. So first of all, from the very beginning, Sage Intacct has never been anything but a cloud-based solution. And that means that we only have one version of software. There are over 17,000 customers using the product today. We are all using the same version of software. And that is a good thing. As Martha Stewart would say, that is a good thing. And we also dance to a different model than maybe what you're familiar with, and that is called best in class. And what does that mean? That means that our best in class is financial management. It means that we are not the solution for everything in your organization. Our claim to fame and our core competency is financial management. We've been architected so that we can integrate with other best-in-class applications, like other applications that maybe are for donor management or member management, or maybe, as I said, Salesforce is a customer relationship management tool that many people use to track their donor and their donor information. So if you have other areas of your organization, payroll as an example, that you're using a product today and you love it, it's working, it's not broke, you don't need to fix it, you can keep that solution and you can integrate that financial information over into Sage Intacct, into our financial engine, and that allows us to have all of that information for reporting. So best in class and open architecture are two takeaways, as well as being in the cloud. We also are going to introduce you today to something called dimensions. And dimensions are a way for you to tag your transactions to a dimension that allows you to then report and filter on the data based on a dimension or a combination of dimensions. We'll talk more and see more about dimensions when we get into the product, but it's a key differentiator for us. And it's a way for you to get to that granular reporting that so many nonprofits need. When you look over at the right-hand side, you know, the focus today obviously is on nonprofit. We work across many different industry-specific solutions. Today, we're going to focus on nonprofit. And in the two bottom quadrants, you see core financials on the left and then additional modules. So core financials is really, when you think of an accounting solution, it's your general ledger, it's your accounts payable, your accounts receivable, it's reports and consolidations and dashboards. It's all of those applications. Now, many times, nonprofits and other types of organizations need additional functionality. So on the right-hand side, there are some additional applications that, based on your needs, you might want to subscribe to. Those modules, those applications integrate right into our financial engine. all of this being run on a cloud platform. There are many, many nonprofits that are using Sage Intacct today. And we're going to take a closer look at the product now so that we can look at how nonprofits are using Sage Intacct.
And Linda, I'm going to hand over control to you so you can show us the product.
All right, that sounds like a plan. So Courtney, if you could just verify that you can see my screen, okay?
Yes, looks great.
Okay, well, perfect. So just to give you all just a little bit of a highlight of what you're looking at, especially if this is your first time to see Sage Intacct, there's a lot of information on this screen, and I want to make sure that you at least have a little bit of the user experience. So the first thing I would tell you is that I am logged into a nonprofit instance. This is a demo environment, so some of the data here is certainly demo data that we have built out to show. I've landed on my controller dashboard, and we're going to talk about dashboards first. But this is the way that I have asked to log on to the system. I've logged in today as Carla Grace, and Carla functions as my controller. She's asked when she logs in, she set it up with her permissioning and her preferences to drop right into this role-based dashboard. Now, there's lots of different dashboards that can be built. They are unlimited, so you can build as many dashboards as you choose, and you can see that I have several. But there are several that are considered role-based. So what's important to Carla as a controller may not be important to someone else who maybe is in a different role. Maybe they are a department head, maybe it's the CFO or a board member. So these dashboards can be personalized and built based on what's relevant to you in your particular role. I've also logged in today as another user, and I've logged in as Trent Hayes. Trent happens to be Carla's manager, and Trent has a different dashboard. Being the CFO, there are some things that he wants to look at that are different than what Carla wants to look at. So again, just looking at what's on these dashboards, it's what's important to you in your particular role. So let's come back to Carla and just a few things about the user experience with navigation. You know, any of our applications, you can navigate multiple different ways. You can navigate from these menus, task, activities, and reports. You can navigate from an overview map, which is great because if you're new to Sage Intacct, this is what's going to give you the ability to look at pictures and icons. Click on any one of these options and it'll take you right into the software. It also shows you a best business practice, and this is one in purchasing where I'm starting with a requisition. I'm going to convert that to a purchase order. Once it's approved, I'll receive a shipment, and then I'll, a few days later, get a vendor invoice from them, and my accounting team will connect that to that purchase order. So this is a process that we deliver as a defined process, although we give you the option to change that process, because at the end of the day, it's your process that you care about, and you want to set this up so that it mirrors the way that you choose to use it. And then there's a third way for us to navigate, and let me move this little bar down, and that is by using our bookmarked menus. Over here on the right-hand side, I've created a bookmarked menu, and this bookmarked menu is personal in that I have gone in and saved a page or bookmarked a page and created my own little personal menu here. This is great when you feel more comfortable with the solution, you know where you go on a frequent basis and perhaps even the order in which you want to travel there. all you need to do is click on that option. It'll take you right into the software. You also can change the description here, and you can move things around in the menu structure. You can drag and drop things and change the order. So that gives us the ability to just click on something and it takes us to that place in the software. I've returned now to the controller dashboard. And one of the things that I want to point out is that, this is a dashboard that is actionable. So you'll see some things on here that you can take action with. The first thing is, you'll notice that there are some tabs up here at the top, or boxes. Those are dashboard filters. So when I look at how my demo environment is structured, it's structured across multiple funds. So I have set up multiple funds in this environment. So this is true fund accounting, and setting up those funds in one instance of Sage Intacct. So what that means is I don't have to log in and log out to transact in these different funds. And that's all done by permissioning. So Carla pretty much has super rights. She's my super user, and I've turned on pretty much everything. So she has that full permissioning turned on. However, I could set up a user and restrict them to specific funds that they could transact in. So that's all part of setting up a user and setting their permissions. What this also allows me to do is to say, when I open up this dashboard, I am looking at it across all of my funds. If I wanted to look at it for just a specific fund or a group of funds, I can do that by using a dashboard filter. And I can then come in and I can point to a specific fund and apply that filter. And the dashboard will represent itself based on that filtering that I indicate. Now, again, look at it from a global or consolidated view across all funds, or break that down into a specific fund or group of funds. Additionally, you can have up to 3 dimensions as dashboard filters. So I chose department, I chose fund, and I chose grant. So if I just wanted to look at a particular grant, let's put it back to all funds. Let's come in and let's select the Health Initiative grant, and let's apply that. And now we'll see the dashboard represents itself, but now it's only specific to this one grant. So utilizing dimensions allows you to tag transactions to those dimensions, and then when you look at your reporting and your filtering, you use those same dimensions to get that granular result. So let's put ourselves back to that consolidated view. The other thing that you can do is you can filter as of a certain date. So if you wanted to look at a previous month or a previous year, you can put in an as of date. And again, the dashboard will represent itself based on that filter. So when I look at the things that are important to the controller, several different things here I want to point out. This is a report of your statement of revenues and expenditures. This is a report that's a standard report in the nonprofit world. As we look at that report, we can look at it on the dashboard. We can execute that report onto our screen. Anything that you see in blue today is hyperlinked, which means that we can drill into that information. So as an example, if I wanted to know more about office supplies, I'm in a meeting, someone's asking me, well, how in the world did we spend that much money on office supplies? What was that for? I can certainly look at that. I can look at my data, and I can compare that data from one year to a next, or one period to a next. If I drill into that information, it's going to take me right into the ledger. It's going to show me the detail. It's also going to let me drill into individual transactions. So when I'm drilling into this information, I'm actually going to get to that source transaction. In this case, it was an AP bill from Costco. And I can see that the bill was actually $5,150, and it has been paid, and I can drill into the payment information. But I can also see that the portion that was coded to office supplies is here, this coded to 5,300. And you'll notice that I took that 5,150 and I split it. So 4,600 of it went to program supplies, and the other 550 went to office supplies, which is what I drilled into. What I'd also point to you is this transaction was coded not only to just the GL account, it was coded to a specific fund and a department, a site, and a grant. Now, in some organizations, you have both projects and grants. So that's why you see project or grant, because sometimes people have both. So tagging this transaction to these dimensions is what gives us that granular data. It gives us the ability to slice and dice, just like you saw me do at the dashboard level. So this is the source transaction of this bill. What I also would point out to you, and we'll see this when we come back to the dashboard in just a moment, is the fact that I can self-document a transaction. So you'll notice down here at the bottom, there's a conversation between Carla and Trent about this transaction. It says, this is the transaction that you and I talked about today. Are you okay with it? So what this allows me to do is within the software, communicate about a specific transaction and to document that conversation at the transaction level. As these conversations are keyed in and shared, workflow in the background sends that message directly to Trent. Trent gets notification, and the conversation is posted here at the transaction level. So why is that important? Well, gosh, old school, you probably picked up the phone and called Trent, or you sent him an email, or you text Trent. Now, all of that goes away. You communicate within the software, and the best part is you're documenting at the transaction level. So 6 months or 6 days from now, you're not going to remember what you did or said, but now you've got it documented and you can go back and look at it. From an audit perspective, that's always a great way to be able to see that, because you, again, won't remember. And if you have to go dig back into your emails, you probably will never find that information. So that tracking that we're talking about here is what we call collaborate. So you're collaborating with other users or with other groups of users. And those can be posted right here. And what's great about this is when the conversation gets sent to the other person, you have a hyperlink right to the bill. Now, you saw it at an AP bill level. It could be a journal entry. It could be a purchase order. It could be any transaction. So Sage Intacct Collaborate, it's part of our core offering, and it's something that all of your users can take advantage of. Now, this report here, the Statement of Revenue and Expenditures, is one that I created with the Financial Report Writer. It's also the one that created this Statement of Financial Summary. And you'll notice that I've got some color coding here. So when I design and define these reports, I can define them the way I choose to present them. And that's important because you have free reign in what you want them to look like. You'll also see that I have some other things on this dashboard. I have some graphical representations of revenues and expenses by category, and even my cash balance. So you can see in a graph, or you can show the data behind that graph just by flipping the button. You can see both ends of the visual there. In addition to the controller dashboard, you'll notice that I have several other dashboards here that, are either role specific or functionally specific. If we look at an end of month dashboard, being able to set up a dashboard to help speed up your month end, utilizing checklist and assigning people to tasks. so that you can make sure that things get done in the proper time frame and in the proper order. Having everything that you need on this end of month dashboard is going to speed up to make sure that you have everything containerized in one place. You don't have to bounce it around from one application to another or run a bunch of different reports, because they're all right here at your fingertips. And speaking of reports and speaking of, being able to save you time, in your organization today, there's someone that's preparing the statement of financial position and someone that's preparing a statement of activities. And oh my goodness, how about that 990? How much time are you investing in the 990? And I would just tell you that, this is why Sage Intacct is so powerful in reporting, is that we're going to gather all this information for you. We're going to produce that report for you so that all you need to do is take that information and move it over to your 990. I talked earlier about, the 958 and being able to keep up with things that were changing from a compliance perspective. So now if you want to look at the statement of financial position and you want to see it with donor restrictions and without donor restrictions. So now we have the ability to address that change in compliancy. And we did this long before the drop dead date, when this had to be done a couple of years ago. So just being able to see all of your information, to drill into that information, is one of the key areas of our financial reporting. In addition to that, let's come back over here to our bookmarks. You may be a nonprofit that is utilizing grants and keeping track of grants, and this may be, a little bit of a task for you. So one of the things that you see here is the ability to focus on grants in a dashboard. So we've put all this together in a dashboard so you can see the positioning of this grant, the specific health initiative grant that we talked about earlier, and being able to see from inception to date the revenue, the total award amount, how much revenue has been posted, and what's the remaining draw on that. So being able to see this data and see it on a dashboard, and then be able to drill into those revenue and expenditures, looking at the budget to actual. So bringing in that budget, and you can assign as many budgets as you choose to in Sage Intacct. So having that information at your fingertips, and then of course, as I said before, drilling into that, you need to know, why did we have office supplies attached or tagged to this specific grant called Health Initiative? Where did that information come from? Where's the detail coming from? And you can see all the information just like we looked at before with that drill down capability. So being able to reach out and touch that information, looking at it from a dashboard perspective, is a way for you to see how your organization is tracking. In addition to that, as we talked about operational data, our polling question, that was all around, understanding how you're tracking, not just financially, but operationally, how are you tracking? And so we have a lot of sample metrics here. Depending on what type of an organization you are, different operational metrics. So as an example, if you were a school, excuse me, some of the things that you might be getting from a system that maybe manages your school enrollment, you may know exactly how many people, how many students are enrolled. You may know how many staff people you have. And then you can make these calculations to say, this is how much tuition we've collected. So based on the number of students we have, this is the average tuition per student. You could also keep track of things like volunteer hours. So these are things that we've set up as statistical accounts. We've entered statistical journal entries, and now we can use that operational data and combine it with financial data to get these types of reports and these types of views. So that information is just another way to point to how your organization is tracking, and very easy for you to do. So if we come back over and we look at, just how do we manage all this? How easy is it for us to set this up and to mirror our processes in Sage Intacct? Well, certainly, part of what you'll do with SWK is to sit down and understand where do you maybe need to make some changes and do some restructuring, perhaps in your chart of accounts, perhaps in the way you set up some of your reports, and being able to define those funds and being able to maybe, import some data that you already have and get that data into the system really quickly. All of that's in the company area. So this is part of what SWK will sit down and work with you on to make sure that you are building and configuring Sage Intacct in the best way for your organization. When you look at these different templates, this is a way for you to populate the template and then upload information so you're not rekeying all of that information. When you look at some of the configurations that you can personalize, every application you can come in and turn on, turn off functionality. In accounts payable, you'll set up some of that functionality to say, do you need to have credit limits? Do you need to be able to put vendors on hold? How do you want the dating to work if you're dating something in a future period? So turning on and turning off functionality is what you'll do in each one of these configuration screens. Which dimensions do you want to use? And again, there are 12 predefined dimensions in Sage Intacct. Grant is one of those dimensions. Employee is one of those dimensions. Department, location. So making sure that you understand how to use dimensions and how you want to use them in each application. Understanding that you can have approvals in many areas, whether it's in AP or in purchasing, and then understanding how to set up your aging buckets. So if you want different choices for how you age your accounts payable bills, you have the option to set that up and configure it. So just being able to personalize Sage Intacct to the way you choose to use it is part of that flexibility that we talk about. When we look at our chart of accounts, you may be used to a chart that is a more linear chart, one that has segments. Segments is something that we don't use in Sage Intacct. All we need to set up a modern chart of accounts is that base or natural account. In the chart, all we see here is just account 1100 and the title of operating cash. When I key a transaction to this specific account, I can set up rules here around which dimensions must be included. So in this case, I've said you must point to a fund in order to post a transaction to the cash account. I must know what fund I need to have as part of that transaction. There's a list of dimensions here. You could check box any of these that you wanted to be required, and that rule will then guarantee that you will get the transactions posted with the right information, and you'll have that comprehensive reporting. Being able to create a chart of accounts that's very simple, I call it lean and mean, means that you don't have all those combinations of segments that you need to create. For most nonprofits, we find that they can reduce the size of their chart tremendously by going to this modern format. So again, if you decide that you want to look at your chart and you want to restructure it and you want to do some cleanup, that's something that the SWK team can help you with and make sure that you get that lean, mean chart of accounts. As we come down, we know there's other things that we talked about in our initial agenda, and that was making sure that we are helping you automate processes. And automation is key. It's key to nonprofits because many times you're trying to do more or the same with less resources. And so anything that you can automate is going to make it faster, it's going to streamline, and it's also going to reduce cost. And cost is always something that all of us want to make sure that we are, watching what we're spending, that we're investing time and not spending time. So I'm going to focus for a moment on just the purchasing and AP area. This is an area that we see a lot of people wanting to address because spend is out of control. They don't know who's buying what until it's after it's already purchased, and then they're responsible for paying for it. So how do we help you with that in Sage Intacct? So one of the ways is to define your process, and as I mentioned before, defining a process that works for you. Maybe you have the ability to start with requisitions and people fill out a requisition and get that approved. Maybe that's not your process. Maybe you start right with a purchase order. Maybe you're not even using approvals today and you want to take advantage of that, so you can certainly set that up. So what I did was I went in and I created a transaction and saved it in draft mode for time purposes. So let's go take a look at a requisition that I keyed in earlier. And this requisition is for some office supplies. I saved it in draft mode so I could get back to it. So this is some office supplies that I want to buy, and basic information here. This is not pertaining to a grant. This is just some office supplies that I want to buy. You can attach a document, a picture, or a document to any of these transactions. So I just tagged something in, pulled that picture in, and then you'll see how I've coded it here. So I've coded it to office supplies, and I've said that it's going to be $300. That's what I've been quoted, and I've tagged it to several different dimensions, so fund and department and site. And this is, again, something that's not specific to a project. Now, once I'm ready to submit it, I'll just go ahead and submit that for approval. And now it's been submitted, the workflow's kicked off, and it's gone to my manager, and my manager happens to be Trent. So Trent's going to get a message. It's going to let him know that he has something that he needs to approve. And when he gets that message, he can approve it from his phone, or if he is in the software in the office, he can do it right from his approved transaction screens, which is where I've landed. And if I was Trent, I would probably want to look at this transaction. I'd want to see, well, it looks like Carla wants some office supplies for $300. I could look at the picture. I could also look at the history, and I could see if there was anyone else that needed to approve this besides myself. And it looks like I'm the only one that needs to approve it, but that's all defined by you. You can have multiple people approving these transactions as well. So as Trent, I'm going to go ahead and approve it. That's going to send a message back to Carla, let her know that her transaction has in fact been approved. And now I'll put on my purchasing hat and I'll convert that requisition right to a purchase order. And converting it to a purchase order, this is where the automation kicks in, folks. This is everything from the requisition comes over and builds that purchase order for you. So no rekeying of information. I'll go ahead and post that, get it processed up so I can send it out to my supplier. And then a few days later, the supplier is going to send me my materials that I've ordered and an invoice. And as the accounting person, I'm going to come in and I'm going to recognize that I have that AP invoice. I'm going to make sure I got billed $300. Everything looks good. I'll go ahead and post that. And once it's posted, it's going to come back and it's going to say, okay, now that you've posted it, you've completed that transaction and you have created a history tab. And that history tab now shows me every step in the process that we just went through. So I started as a requisition, I then converted it to a PO, and then I attached the vendor invoice. So I don't have to dig in the filing cabinet anymore. I can look right here. I can drill into any step in the process. And when this is paid, I'll also have the payment details. So I've eliminated your filing cabinets, and just a quick metric there. For every 12 filing cabinets that you have, it takes one person to maintain them. So just understanding that this is only one area of the product that has that type of automation. So it's really saving you the steps and getting you exactly what you need from an audit purpose. So everything is being tracked, user date, and time stamped. So we've taken a quick view of 3 different areas in Sage Intacct. We started with dashboards today and visibility and access to information. We then looked at some of the ways that you can personalize Sage Intacct by looking at the company area, where you can define how you want your users set up, your funds set up, how you want to structure your chart of accounts. And then we also looked at an automated process with purchasing and AP. So Courtney, I'm going to ask for you to take it back, and we'll finish up, and we'll open it up for questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Linda.
So as Courtney's taking control back over, if there are any questions that you have, make sure and post those.
And I think we should be up.
I don't see it. Let's see here. There we go. Thank you.
Awesome. Perfect.
So I've got it. Thanks. Lots of nonprofits using Sage Intacct today. Some of these you may recognize. I would tell you that the one other comment that I would make about Sage Intacct that you may not be aware of is that we are the only preferred provider from the AICPA, the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. And I mention that because the International Federation of Accountants, IFAC, as you see here, they use Sage Intacct. So I happen to be the solution consultant on that opportunity, and they've been using our solution for many years now. So Donors Choose is another big one. MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, Room to Read, lots of great nonprofits here using the Sage Intacct solution. All right. And then again, just another accolade that you may or may not be aware of is the G2 crowd. And the G2 crowd is different than other analyst reviews because the G2 crowd allows you as a user to go in and enter your review of Sage Intacct. So this is more about people using Sage Intacct and what they think of the product. We've received several different accolades from them. And most recently in winter of 2022 for customer satisfaction. And these are the areas that we covered today: visibility, flexibility, and automation. And just as some final thoughts, any questions that we can answer, Courtney?
So I think we have a few different questions. Our first one is going to be about multiple entities. So one of our audience members has multiple entities in multiple locations. How can Sage Intacct help them manage their consolidations and reporting needs? And I think we got a bit of that in the demo.
Okay, all right, so let's do a little terminology check. So Courtney said multi-entity. So first off, let me define entity for you. Entity is the same thing as company. So if you said we are wanting to manage multiple companies, that would be the same thing as saying multiple entities. And you certainly have the ability to set up as many entities or companies as you choose to, and then you can consolidate those together. So you can report at the entity level, you can report on a group of entities, or you can report on all entities. Now, what you saw today in nonprofit is that instead of us setting up entities as companies per se, we set up entities as funds. And you can certainly do that in a nonprofit configuration. So we use entities as funds, and that's what you saw today in my environment. Underneath entities slash funds, you also have the ability to set up locations. So locations can be included in a consolidated view. They can also be looked at individually. So if you wanted to use that hierarchy of, I have a particular fund and underneath it I have some sub-funding that I want to segregate, I also want to see it consolidated, you can use that hierarchy to do that. So it's entity and then it's location. Both of those are unlimited.
Great, thank you, Linda. And then we also have another question, I think from a Sage 100 user. So they're saying, our organization does not use Sage on the cloud. Do we have to use the cloud version of Sage 100?
So Sage 100 is different than Sage Intacct in that Sage 100 has some limitations that I'm aware of. I'll be totally transparent. I'm not a Sage 100 person, so I've never used it, but it's my understanding that it has some limitations around being single entity or multi-entity, and then the way that it is deployed, and deployed meaning the technology that's used to deploy it. So if the product is being hosted, that's different than being a true cloud solution. If you look at Sage Intacct, we are a true cloud solution. We are not able to be hosted like Sage 100. So our product is a true cloud product. There's not another option for deployment. And we as the publisher maintain all of the backups, putting it in the data center, managing all of that. That's all done from us so that you as the user do not have to do any of those activities. That's all part of the subscription that you have with us.
Great, thank you, Linda. And I think just to add a bit more to that question from an SWK standpoint, if you are on Sage 100 but not the cloud version, we do offer Sage 100 Cloud, and that's something that you can talk to your rep about along with Sage Intacct. And I think just to add to Linda's point, while we do have the Sage 100 Cloud version, which would allow you to be on a cloud platform, Sage Intacct will give you a more robust system to be working from. And so that's something that you can talk to your rep about, and we can definitely have them reach out to give you a more in-depth conversation about the two. And then I think if there's any more questions that want to come through, I'll give our audience another minute just in case you haven't had a chance to submit your question. But Linda, you have been really great and touched on a lot of points today, from the demo to the ability to integrate with other solutions and multiple locations. And so I just want to thank you for being with us today and for having such a great presentation.
You're so welcome, Courtney. It's always a pleasure to be with you. We've done several of these. We've got a series. If you have not gone out to SWK's website, I'm sure that you could find more information about previous webinars that we've done. So if you're not, if you're not totally in the nonprofit vertical, we've done some other verticals. It's really important to know what's out there and to understand and to ask questions. So after you review one of these webinars, if you have questions, I would encourage you to come back to the SWK team and ask your questions. And certainly if there's something that I can do or anyone from our team can do to help facilitate that meeting, we would love to do that as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Linda. And I'd also like to thank everyone in our audience for attending this webinar today. And we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day.
All right. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.